Like people think that something like Salesforce is preordained. It's like, it's not. It's a 15-year journey. You think about CRMs go all the way back to Siebel in the 90s, right? And then, and then maybe Salesforce shows up in the 04-ish time frame. And by the time you get to 2010, yes, every college kid is reading blogs about CAC and LTV and call to close ratios and pipeline ratios and all this stuff like that. But that's a 15-year journey to kind of establish that category, right?
Welcome. This is Second Acts, a podcast where we document how SaaS leaders chart the challenging, chaotic, ultimately foundational acts of scaling up organizations. And I'm your host, Krish Subramanian, co-founder and CEO at Chargebee. Our guest today first met his co-founders when they hired him as an engineering leader at an 8-person enterprise search startup, Endeca, a business that eventually scaled to a team of 550 people, a $1.1 billion exit to Oracle in 2011, and an alumni that have built and led impactful SaaS brands such as Sprout Social, Toast, Salsify, and many others. One of those brands is Jellyfish, an engineering management platform. And for this episode, I spoke with their co-founder and CEO, Andrew Lau. Before starting Jellyfish, Andrew spent years observing the engineering function and its core problems evolved from multiple perspectives, as an individual contributor, a manager, an exec, and a founder. That personal window has helped them paint the white space of a new category with great purpose. During our conversation, Andrew shares how 2 decades of shared context has informed Jellyfish's existence, why they settled on a mid-market motion instead of pursuing the expected SMB-first PLG play for their category, or an Endeca-like enterprise GTM, how to compare category creation versus mature market opportunities, and why with Jellyfish they have chosen the former, and how to think about scaling up as a way of managing reserves of capital and patience, and a whole lot more. Dive right in. And if you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And if you really like the conversation, drop us a review. I would really appreciate it. Thank you. Awesome. Andrew, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Super excited about talking to you to learn more about your journey building Jellyfish, and especially having been part of multiple scale-up journeys and what you are building today. Would love to learn a lot more about this as part of the series. Thanks for joining us.
Well, hey, thanks for having me here. And I think I said to you in a pre-email and stuff, like, happy to share what we've seen. Like, part of this is the entrepreneur journey, probably a little impostor syndrome. We're not done yet. And it's hard to draw a line and make declarations around things definitively working or not, but I'm excited to share what we've done if that's helpful for others to learn from along the way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thanks. So let's begin from the start, right? Can you talk to us about what Jellyfish does?
Sure. So Jellyfish is what we call an engineering management platform. So we help companies with at scale with large numbers of software engineers to really help lead and manage that team, and that has a number of things. It helps teams understand what the team's up to, where they're stuck, where their resources are going, help them understand the sentiment of the team, and then plug into the processes that all contemporary engineering organizations have to do, whether it be reporting into board meetings, participating in financial planning, or even something as exciting, I use air quote exciting here, as software capitalization and tax credit automation. While those might sound non-intuitively as engineering things, they are part of the business of software engineering. And as I've learned in my career, as you kind of move up the stack of scale of software engineering teams, it's no longer just about the code, it's about your team, and it's how they execute and how they deliver business value through business processes. And that's really where we play.
Brilliant. As you mentioned somewhere, right, companies and products are really byproducts of the founders and their experiences. I'm able to resonate to it because this is not something intuitive where you're talking about financial planning and board discussion, right, and connecting the dots to engineering management.
Yeah.
Would love to learn. And Jellyfish, starting Jellyfish itself is it's like a second act for your fourth company, right?
Yeah.
And you were with Endeca in a different era of software, and you continue to work with the same people. Can you talk to us more about this journey?
There's a ton there. So I guess I'll answer a little bit in order. I truly do believe startups are the product of founders because like there's so many subjective choices we make along the way. And yes, I don't know what the line is when you become a mature company where then it's a product of the market. But especially early on, um, the choices you make as a founder, I think the most important one is which market you listen to, right? And whether you choose to listen to them or not. And so that has implications of like, hey, who are you selling to? Whose problems are you trying to solve? And then when someone says they want this or they don't want that, or they'll pay for you this, it's your choice as a founder whether you're going to deliver it or not. Whether you choose to solve that problem or whether you're going to choose to listen to that person versus that person, right? And maybe the person is yourself. You're going to solve for yourself. I mean, I think there's, but I think because of all those subjective choices of who you're going to listen to, that is why there's actually these companies evolve and change. And so I talked to a lot of earlier companies, and when they're really early on, I actually think the word competition is actually moot because there's so much meandering that's going to come as these markets develop. And as a founder, you pick your spots around what you're going to do. And that competitor may not be a competitor because they choose to listen to somebody else, right? Whether it's a different segment or a different persona or a different problem space. And then how you choose to answer that again is another decision space. And so that's why I think you see these products and companies evolve quite a bit in their growth and along the way.
Brilliant. You see me smiling so much because I share that worldview, right? The differentiation emerges because of who you listen to and who pulls you in a particular direction as you develop the product, right? Not based on like who looks like competitor today.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, so, and I wanted to answer your second question actually about the second version story. And I think it is important to me. So there are three co-founders of Jellyfish, me, Dave, and Phil. I've known these guys for now 25 years, which is a really long time. Even if you ignore startup years, like that's a long time in regular years. And so just for context, Dave and Phil actually hired me in 1999 as the first engineer of this company. It was an 8-person company. You said the name earlier, Endeca, and I think it's been a while since that company's name is said, but it's I got to see the company go from 8 people to 550, and then we eventually sold it to Oracle for over $1 billion. And so it was a great experience for me along that way, and it was also a chance that I learned the taste of startups along the way, right? And so me and Phil chose to come back together. Dave was the CTO there. Phil was the first product head there. And we, three of us worked very close together for probably the first 4 years of the company. And so we chose to bring the proverbial band back together, initially 2016, and then found Jellyfish in 2017, in that way. And I think, I don't know if you were asking this, but like, what's the why and how does this work on this stuff? And I think for me, it's a few things. Like one, we actively chose to do it together, not of naivety, but actually intentionality. We very much valued what it meant to work together, the dialogue we had, the collaboration, the debates, the style, the vibe, learning and wanting to win together again, was the emotional part, in my view, of how we actually decided to get back together. And I think that life, as we all get older, is hard to find intersection, right? Like geography comes into play, life stage comes into play. Sometimes I watch other friends, like egos come into play, and that's not a good reason, but it happens. And so I think we all shared a common substrate of wanting to do something together again, which is rare in my view. And so we said, let's capture that. But so that was in some ways the emotional part of it. But then I think the other side of it is like, once you recognize that, it brought a bunch of intentionality about this. And so we talked a lot about what kind of company we wanted to build. And I actually think the biggest asset we have as co-founders is a strong relationship that like helps us. Phil asks, you guys must get along all the time. It's like, no, we bicker like, old spouses on this stuff, right? But I think there's a willingness to see the argument through. I think is a big part of it. I think that's what.
And healthy respect.
Yeah, it's that follow through and the respect. And so I think that's that's the part that I think is the founder journey that's really important. And it's not easy on a given day, but I think you have to work on it and be active about it. But the other part is it brings the shared experience, gives us common vocabulary. So like the hard part is when you co-found something with someone you don't know, you say stuff, you read academic blogs, but everyone projects their own stuff into it, into those words. And so when you actually have common vocabulary, you're like, you can say like, oh, you may not even have the words for it, but like we worked on that deal together and we did blah, 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 or how that team broke off. Yeah. Or how that hire really didn't work or like remember what that he or she did during that time? We wouldn't do that again. Or do you remember that vibe we had? Like we want that, right? And so that gave us a ton of common context and vocabulary. And so I remember sitting in a sushi bar in 2016. We wrote down a bunch of stuff we wanted out of this next act, that like was not actually about a specific business. It was about meta. So half of it was about people and culture, and some of it were things like, hey, we're at a certain point in our life now, and so for example, we have families, and how do we make it work for us, and what kind of team are we trying to bring, and what's the vibe, and what's the style, what's the mix, and like what's the soft words for culture, and like what like the things we value there, and so like that's probably half the list. It's not on Mac Notes, we still have it. The other half was actually about the business dynamics, like what kind of business, and so it's not magic, but it's like, hey, we said like not not consumer this time. We wanted B2B. And we wanted something that was technology centric and innovation, like technology centric and product centric. And we also wanted new markets, not old, right? So we wanted something like in these new areas. And I think a really important part is I think in our words back then, we said we want to touch a lot of people. We want to reach a lot of people. And I think in VC speak, it's like a big TAM, I think it would have said, but we said like, hey, there's three of us. There's like a relatively high opportunity cost. We want to make something that actually has a chance to make a dent out there. And it's not just financial, right? It's actually about customers, changing the market, influencing a large team that actually can go off and do more things. But like, because we're like, look, earlier career, like there was a lot of small developers, and I don't want to take anything away from like lifestyle companies or companies that exit and good returns for founders, but this was actually more, we wanted to make a bigger swing this time, right? Like acknowledging it's harder and more difficult and likely to fail, but we want to take an at bat. Like that was our desire, right? So these were like meta criteria we set up, but I think that could only be done in the product of actually having shared experience together, right? You need to be able to say, these are common ground that we actually want. Right. And then the last bit is actually like why we fell into Jellyfish itself was itself a byproduct of our experiences together. I actually, I think Phil goes, and I'll PG it for this audio here, but like Phil's like, which one of you guys is going to do this engineering thing this time? I think he comes from the product background, and Dave and I actually come from more of the engineering technology background, and I think Dave and I put our fingers on our nose. We're like, not me, right? That I think we said that job. I think I'll mute the expletive, but that job effing sucks, right? And like I think Dave was like, they're always yelling at you, right? Like the business people and the engineers are all yelling at you because the business people don't understand engineering understand business, and the whole darn job is about holding both sides together while they like just yell at you, right? And that's why the job sucks. There's no data, right? And Phil's credit goes, he's like, how come there's no Salesforce for engineering? How come no one's built that? And that was again was shared vocabulary for us because we grew up in a generation when selling was without data, right? And then we used to watch how like sales bickering was also about like business didn't understand sales. They're like, why don't you guys have the quarter? It's like, oh, we got the quarter, right? Like no one actually had data to support whether they're going to successfully sell the quarter or not. And so I think that little small vignette, like, and that phrase that Phil said, Salesforce for engineering, I know that's what not engineers would talk about that way, but it set us up in the mission right there, right? And that like, and I'm just saying this because that required the shared experience to be able to have that joke, to be able to have that comment, to be able to have the discussion, to give us the kernel of what we're actually going to go do.
A serendipitous moment when like a banter or
Yeah.
a casual conversation turns into a powerful idea.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So I guess what you're hearing from me is second acts requires some experience and shared context to be able to do the second one, because you have to acknowledge the first, right?
And there are so many things that you actually mentioned that I want to unpack, right? And I heard the words, the craft, almost like, or I heard it this way. We all hear it through the filter of our context, right? And I heard the word craft almost like craft, the craft of software and the business of software, right? And it's fascinating, right? The journey and what has led to where you are today. And then, and talking about that, right, you mentioned about how the company took off during the pandemic, right? Something that none of us want, and yet the pull of the market played a role in a particular way. But at the same time, your readiness matters when it comes to like being ready to be able to serve the demand matters, right? So would love to double click on that nuts and bolt to the readiness factor or the luck factor to be ready to be able to embrace that. Can you talk a little bit about that phase and what that looked like?
Yeah.
leading up to
And,
that?
and then let me set context for folks that probably don't know what, our art history as a company. Prior to the pandemic at the beginning of 2020, we were, 20 employees and teens of customers. Okay. Today we're, a couple hundred employees and hundreds of customers, right? So really market change, in this part of it. And, we kicked, and I think, we talked about this briefly earlier, which is, in Q3 2020, we suddenly sold more in 1 month than all of 2019, right? And I'm just setting context here on this part of it, and I'll come back to the word luck in a second, because I usually use the word luck in two ways. I say luck in a way of saying thankfulness and deference to the world of things that you can't control, and luck not in the way that like we're not working hard, but luck as in the sense that I think entrepreneurs and founders use this a lot because luck and timing are often used synonymously. They're both things you can't control, right? I think that's part of it. So then you said like, well, readiness to go do that, and it's making me think, because like when you're in it, you don't think you're ready, right? So you're asking me for a post facto analysis on this part of it,
Right.
like so like I, like all founders out there, I would take caution. Maybe this is fitting, so where I'm like fitting this part of it, but I would actually go back a couple things. We're unusual, I guess, for the startup world, because I think there's so much startup like mantra, which is you get out there and you do all these, get loud and get hard, go fast, and all that stuff like that. We're actually very quiet for the first couple of years of the company. We actually first couple of years of the company, we spent just building product. So I actually think we were very laser focused on the problem space and who we wanted to solve for. We wanted to solve for engineering leaders at scale with a leadership problem space, because we felt that 20 years have brought innovation to the engineer. The way the folks code today is not the way I learned to code. I think they're much better at it than I am. But the way that I think leadership decisions are made, business decisions, the way CEOs interact with engineering, how FP&A and finance do is the same as it was 30 years ago. And so we felt that was the market gap, the innovation gap, the selling gap. That was the space, and that's always been true from the beginning. So we knew who we were listening to in that space, or earlier vernacular. But we actually came with the opposite hubris of knowing what the solution was. We came in actually assuming we didn't know. And so we drew, I think, on a playbook that I think, well, or at least, again, shared reference. I think people used to do this a lot more in the 90s and early aughts, which is they built their businesses on services. And so if you look at actually a lot of companies in the 90s, you'd have a lot of service, a lot of custom stuff. And then over there, you'd actually extract the product over time and build in love services margins, but you'd use services to pay for product. And then you kind of extract the product and learn to sell the product out of it. And you essentially use the service revenue to build what you want to go do. And we saw bits of that in our early journey together. And I think we wanted to bring that same vibe. And the positive parts of that, the negative versions are sometimes you're behest to services and it can pull you in funny directions. You have to control it. But the part that was actually really good is you actually truly, if you listened right, found what the problem is that someone wanted to solve specifically and how to provide value to them immediately in that time without trying to overthink it as master platform. You're just trying to solve that problem. And in doing so, you actually you discover the solution in a way that customer wants to see it. And so, because we're lucky enough to be able to raise seed funding, instead of actually collecting service revenue, we just took that same mentality and found the kind of alpha partners. We'd call folks up and said, hey, we'll do whatever you want, free even, but we'll do it by hand, do it by spreadsheets, do a custom code for you because we want to do it for you. We'll do your board decks, we'll do your spreadsheets, we'll do, whatever calculation you're trying to figure out for you. So with a services mentality, so we spent a couple of years doing this, and it was about choosing the right, kind of alpha partners to develop this with. And now we had an eye to building a platform along the way, so that allowed us to pick and choose and yes, say we're doing custom stuff, but start to reuse things to build a platform behind the scenes. And so that was like an example of a product mentality that, and I think still holds today. Assume we don't have the answer. Assume the customer knows the problem, who you listen to knows the problem, but the solution, the product will be found through the doing with them, right? That dialogue that has to happen is the journey. And so that is kind of our product thing that actually happened, through, let's say we really kind of got going in mid 17. So like kind of 17 into 18 into 19, right? I think it was a big part of it. And so like that was a foundation that I think gave us, like what a conviction or what we wanted to do there. So that's the kind of the product half of the house. I think the other preparation I think actually has to do with building the right selling or go-to-market motion. So I think as a founder, you have the ability to choose who you want to listen to, and that leads you to a product space you're going to play in, right? And then the second part, you actually have a choice in, and it's not your choice alone because the market has to receive you, is how you want to service or sell or go to market motion into that market, right? And so a couple of things we wanted and knew pretty early on. So we knew that the space that we were solving for was not going to be a PLG self-service credit card swipe. Because executives at this point, they're not running, we wanted to serve the executive layer because we felt that was the innovation gap. We also thought there was budgets available there, but this is not a credit card swipe budget. This is a place dealing with complicated personas, security concerns, and all of these things that meant that no matter what you did, it wasn't going to be a credit card swipe. So we knew that wasn't the motion we were going for. I think lots of dev tools are sold that way because the developers are grabbing it, downloading it, trying it, and swiping. But that wasn't the problem space we were doing. We were already in a mode that we actually had to talk to a leader that was hard to reach sometimes. So you're already spending the essentially outreach cost on that stuff. So we knew that it wasn't going to be the SMB self-service PLG motion for us. We were actually, working with some of our advisor investors. Many of them pushed us to be like, hey, you should be selling these 7-figure deals, like, McKinsey consultant deals on this stuff. And we instinctually didn't want that either, because I think that often the downside of selling early 7-figure deals in that space, high 6, early 7s, is you live in a world which is highly custom, because if you're paying that kind of, stroking that kind of check, you really, if I'm a buyer, you need it to work for you in all your quirky enterprise ways. And so we instinctively, or we even talked about, didn't want that either, because that leads to a product that is not reusable with multiple people. That leads you to custom one-off products often that may not scale with repeatability to multiple customers, because it might, but it might not, right? There's so many biases for you to build custom things that is not repeatable in time. And I think in a contemporary world, people demand products that are rich and usable and repeatable, right? That's what I think the zeitgeist of the SaaS generation has really brought us, right? The consumerization of this stuff has brought a desire or a bar to be very high. There's no room for shelfware and custom solutions that never actually get used, right? So we didn't want to build that company either. I'm not saying it can't be successful doing it, but we didn't want that either. And so we wanted something that used to be called the Valley of Death in the, mid five figure deals, in early aughts. That would have been called the Valley of Death because economically you couldn't make it work because you needed to, spend money either on airplanes or steak dinners and all this stuff, and you could never offset those costs, those price points. It's the only way that most companies tackle that Valley of Death story was throw it out to channel partners, or really the only way they could make it economically work back in
And
early
initial
aughts.
software, the previous era of software.
Yeah, previous area of software, right? But we felt that that's like at the time a new school motion that needed to be done, and so like mid five figure things that were like not PLG self service on the phone, and I think a couple of innovations. Like one, I actually think that Zoom selling actually became relevant on that stuff, and so you didn't have to pay the high flights and costs and that stuff, and I actually think different buyers don't want you to visit them too. So like it could economically work. And I'm not saying it's a forever place. I think, in the last couple of years, everyone's kind of moved up market a bit on that space. But I think for us, that was a conviction filled difference because of the kind of product and the kind of business we wanted to build. And so I would say we actually fought for a while for that, right? It took conviction to do that because every company in that 2017 generation was PLG, sexy and exciting. That was where the market was sexy and exciting. I think people had seen templates of true 7-figure enterprise selling as like things you could do. But I think it took some conviction to say we wanted to sell at this price point. And that meant we had to prove it. We had to prove it by selling some of those things ourselves, finding sellers that actually, were able to be successful in that space. And like building a go-to-market team in that space. We had to fight the market, or at least fight the the corporate market to actually establish that.
Right. And the sellers, right? I would imagine that you are looking for people who will talk to engineering leaders to be able to make the sale, right? And finding that intersection of skills to be comfortable selling to engineering managers and those 6-figure deals is actually a very hard combination.
Right. Because you need enough,
that talent pool.
like you need domain centricity to understand the quirkiness of selling to technologists, but you also need the patience of like learning to negotiate security concerns and multiple stakeholders and a little more roundtable sale on that stuff. So you need the maturity to be able to do that, but also not be like, I got my magic Rolodex. Don't talk to me, product people. I know how to do this, right? That's the kind of older school 7-figure enterprise selling, and so like that conviction, let us find, the market and the team that we actually wanted. And we're very lucky to find them. And so to me, those are the two foundations that laid the groundwork for what happened, right? And so we chose a market that we felt was very relevant and high TAM, because engineering costs have become really high and very strategic for companies. That's the foundation. We built product that we spent 2 years actually really listening to who we wanted to sell to, that laid foundation of that stuff. And a mid-market motion that like was largely sold over Zoom. And so that when those table stakes were laid, where the table was set, then the pandemic happened, everyone went remote. And all of a sudden, people were like, oh my God, I have this very expensive strategic engineering team. I used to see them all the time. What are they doing? How are we going to win in this business? And so suddenly it was like, I need help leading my team. Right. And I actually am happy to buy over Zoom. So this is where like we locked into the foundations that actually allowed us to accelerate in that time.
And when you, I want to zoom out a little bit on that particular topic, right? Because we use the word choose, choice, and not, right? In a very intentional, very interesting way. You also previously you spoke about, as founders, you also spoke about getting into new markets and not old ones.
Yeah.
Right. And here you're talking about making the choice between mid-market and versus the enterprise. Can you unpack that part? Like what impact did that choosing new market have on eventual scaling?
I frankly still think about this today, right? So like we are in a space which is still white space. It's like in the sense that it is not invented yet. like people think that something like Salesforce is preordained. It's like, it's not. It's a 15-year journey. You think about CRMs go all the way back to Siebel in the 90s, right? And then and then maybe Salesforce shows up in the 04-ish time frame. And by the time you get to 2010, yes, every college kid is reading blogs about CAC and LTV and call to close ratios and pipeline ratios and all this stuff like that. But that's a 15-year journey to kind of establish that category, right? And so what we decided we want to do is, like, we like spaces to the like that were white spaces, the categorization space, like where it hasn't been invented yet. Like, we're only less than halfway through that journey in my theory on this stuff. We haven't figured it all out, right? But we said like to choose the two barriers, right? Like highly mature markets, highly competitive, not super differentiated products. Every product looks the same with different colors and price sheets. Okay, like that's what a mature market looks like. Dogfight deals, right? And then whereas category creation, you're in a space where it's creative. No one thinks they want you to begin with, right? They're like, who are you? What do you do? I don't need one of those things. There's no line in them. So, like, let's talk about the plus minuses. Okay. Some people like these mature markets because you don't have to overthink what the product is. It's very clear. You just build it, right? You just execute it. It's just a execution play. And you don't have to like convince a buyer to do something. You're order taking. They know what you are. You might have a cheaper one, a brighter pink one, whatever it is, but they know what you are. So sales cycles are fast and you can be very efficient in this space. And so that is one playbook, right?
Right.
This one is more creative. You have to invent the product, right? But at the same time, no one gives an F about you. Who are you? What are you doing? Maybe you're making stuff up, right? Like, you have to be noisy. Your marketing costs are going to be more expensive. But you're not dogfighting on a given day. And I think for us, our personalities are more enjoying this part of it more, right?
Right.
And so we just made an active choice. We want to seek products and markets that look more like this than this, and there's a cost, right? It's
So that as well.
slower sales cycles. Like, there's less corporate activity, right? Like, like no one cares about you for a very long time, right? So it's not all perfect, right?
It's something, yeah. Yeah, and it's something for people to actually deliberately think about when making these choices, because you cannot have it all in terms of like trying to find those blue ocean markets where you are trying to create a category while trying to think that you are ready, where there is instant market demand for something like that, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen.
And probably you choose a little bit of each, right? Like, it's not a binary decision. I think some markets are in between, and but I think as a founder, you end up figuring out which taste you like better,
Right. So you have spent most of your career as an engineer, right? So one of the things I would love to know more about from your perspective is on the go-to-market, right? So as an engineer, now focusing in the role of CEO, what does it take to scale go-to-market for a complex set of personas that you deal with, that you sell to? And you are at the intersection of engineering, and your value proposition is also towards like making financial decisions and product management, and that too with sales-led motion, right? And what has been your engineer founder perspective in pursuing this scaling journey? And how do you think about optimizing sales cycle from first principles? And what has been the most difficult aspect of all of this?
Well, there's a lot here. Like, look, I actually think I don't think we have the answer, man. Right? Like, we're all learning along on this stuff, right? I actually think, maybe you're supposed to CEOs say, like, we got it all figured out. I don't know. We're learning as we go, right? And I think a couple things though. I think it helped a lot for me to have the first experience with David and Phil. Those guys taught me how to sell, right? Like, I remember my early memories of those guys going on sales calls. And those guys like literally learning me how to clean myself up, right? And how to talk in meetings and how to show up and how to think about sales, like how to think about that world on that part of it. And so learning what it tastes like to close a deal and what it tastes like to hit a quarter. I learned that from that company. Even though I was in the engineering space, I lived in the sales engineering slot for a while. So like it was like getting the taste of it there. Again, give common vocabulary, reference points, and emotion things you seek on that part of it. The other part is like, I was just talking to someone about this. Like, I think when you come at it from an engineer's perspective, yeah, like, look, we're probably like, I'll just say I'm probably overly robotic and overthink things, and X and Y. But like, there's a couple of assets about that. One, um, because you can structurally decompose things more, right? Even though it might be robotic and less instinctive around like, hey, do this, then do this, then do this. Well, at least you're laying the foundation for a sales process, right? Like, and I think that is a big part of it. The other part is I actually think because our buyers were us, we actually have an edge because we understand that persona well. So one, it like, I actually think if you just like, I think it needed this type of content creation company with our buyers that are quirky, and I can say quirky because I was an engineer, I'm quirky, right? Quirky buyers, you have to get in their head and understand their personas. It's a very different way of brain thinking than like an average salesperson or an average marketer thinks about, right? So I think we bring that understanding and empathy first, that we can actually drive it home with our team, that sits in our positioning, the way we actually deliver product and the way we market, and the way we talk, with our customers. And I think because that statement is one of empathy, like we've been there, buyer, we've been there, we've been you, we understand the pain. We know what it's like to be, like I can literally say to myself, I didn't know how to show up in a board meeting, didn't know how to actually like lead people, didn't know, had to learn these things along the way. And so in the same way, Chris, that you're putting this together, this series of talks for future entrepreneurs, part of the subtle mission here too is like, I'm trying to enable the engineering leaders that were myself to be more successful business leaders myself, right? So there's an undertone of that is in everything we do, right? This is not just a pure let's win this market for the sake of winning the market for money. There's a wanting to make the world better too, right? And some of that is actually around teaching those folks there. So to me, those represent the foundations of both the plumbing and the sales process parts of it. I think the other part too is like, we've been lucky while we're trained in the engineering and product realms, we've been lucky to actually, be leading and drive go-to-market side stuff in later parts of our careers ourselves. And so we have reference points of both empathy and also practitioners. And we know we don't know, so we can bring in advisors and all of these things to help us supplement. I think that's what getting older is. You know where your spots are weaker and you're willing to pull in help on things. And then you also know more people, so you can actually ask for help on things.
Plus recruitment, does it get a lot more easier to be able to get the right partners? Or at least know the kind of gaps or the kind of partners that you want?
I think at least you learn the people stuff. You're like, hey, not like this kind of jerk, and like more like this. And so I think what bad patterns look like more. I think success, I think every company is different. So you say you don't want to hire the exact same people you had before, but I think you can get away from the anti-patterns faster, right, on things. And you can sometimes when you really are looking for expertise or you're looking for someone to work with you, like it's which thing you're seeking more on that stuff.
So my co-founder says one statement, right?
Yeah.
He says, good judgment comes from bad judgment
Yes.
comes from experience.
Yes. And I think you if you stub your toe enough times, then you're like, you want to avoid that, and you're like, I'm not going to do that failure pattern again, right? So I wish I had that perfect part of it, but I think the biggest takeaway I would summarize, because we are ex-practitioners, we know the domain well, and so we actually can at least lay the bones of how we're actually going to attack this market, right? And then the other one is like, with a more systematic engineer thinking, then I think it actually helps us as we scale, because then you can decompose the problem into a more kind of, because a lot of operations at scale now look these days, for companies as they scale, operations are very quantitative now, right? Unlike they were like 30 years ago. They're highly quantitative activities. And in some ways, it's more in the realm of what engineering stuff looks like in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. One last question.
Yeah, please.
So this is your perspectives at the intersection of multiple disciplines is very interesting. I would love to know, like, how you think about capital, essentially, like as someone who has been through the journey multiple times, and capital more as an engine for setting the next act of scale. And how does being in a new category change this particular equation?
Wow. Okay. So like, let's dumb it down for my simple mind here. Like, how does being in a new category require raising more money? Is roughly what you're saying?
Or how do you even think about, how should a founder think about raising capital through that lens, especially if you are in a new category space?
Yeah. I mean, I wish.
And in the current market conditions.
Yeah. I mean, the current market's hard, right? But I would say that I wish it were that easy to say that it's actually in the founder's control in this. I think the reality is, my view is, the power is still in the investment side, and you're behest to the capital markets in that way as they ebb and flow. So I'm not sure if you could talk to, like, another founder, like, you could intellectually say, hey, new categories require more capital. I think we can intellectually say that because, like, existing categories have, higher velocity sales, but it's more dogfighty. But like, in general, you think about new categories that require probably more spent on R&D and more spent on category creation, marketing, right? I think those are outsized effects that you actually have to pay for. They're probably outstrip a mature category payment, right? So like, we could know that. The problem is, if you're a founder, you're just going to you're raising your seed, your A, your so-and-so. You could say the stories I just said here. Investors looking at this like, I'm either going to cut a, $1 million, $3 million, $5 million, $10 million check, or I'm not. Whether I believe this guy or gal around their plan of how they're going to spend their capital. So I'm just saying we can intellectualize it. I just think by the time you get to pitching and actually raising money, they're going to raise money in the way they are. I actually think it's a bit more around the narrative and painting the story of patience with the founders and the boards and investors along the way. Because I think, like, look, we read a lot of media and like, look, you're right, the best companies in the world just sap and they just click and they just fly off the shelves. Shoot, I want that too, right? But 90% of companies are not that, right? They take time. And I think, to me, market activations, these kicks, are largely under your control. You can choose big markets, and yeah, there's like decade right timing on that stuff. But like, the tactics of when it kicks, you can nudge it and influence it to a degree, but the market has to happen for you, especially in these new markets. So like, to a certain degree, that there's betting you make in that space. I think as a founder, you have to give yourself enough capital to know you can't control the timing, right? Like, so you should raise enough to give time, because like, nothing happens fast ever. And part of it is because you can't control it. Like, you could say, like, we had an exciting company. If you start the clock at 2020, if you start the clock at 2017, you could say, well, gee, those first couple of years are kind of not the most exciting pacing from an externalized factor, right? Right. So like, I would say that, like, you need capital and patience along the way. And the reality is, capital's not patient. It wants to go. It's been invested. Let's crank it. And so I think there's a little bit of judiciousness that actually has to come from it as a founder operator, to choose to like, get enough capital to generate patience, but also then to be judicious around when you're going to call your shot and push it in, right? Because sometimes I meet companies that they're like, oh, I raised money, so like, I'm supposed to just scale it. All the blogs say so. And I'm like, yeah, I'm glad you raised a lot of money, and that's good that you're able to do that. But there's an art here too, which is, if you deploy it all at once when the market's not ready for you doing it, you've shot your shot, and that's like, there's a bit of that art too that actually has to be sequencing. So that's less around capital raising, is more about capital preservation, and actually deploying it at the right time.
Right. Beautiful. And I also think that there is something to this particular narrative when it comes to also employee expectations, right? The people that you recruit and bring on board in the journey, you want them along in the journey in a particular way, where they are actually believing in the journey and making the changes and driving towards the future that we are trying to create. At the same time, like, having that candid and transparent conversation about this particular perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's tremendously hard, right? Like, the number one, as a founder, you don't actually know what's going to kick. You just don't. Like I just said, there's externalized forces that actually happen that are largely out of your control. I mean, the macro thesis might be true, but like, when the tactics kick in, some you can control. And I think mature markets easier to control, but immature markets it's harder, right? Because you're waiting for the markets to activate. Yeah, you can do more to pivot and lean into vectors that are moving. So like, if you yourself have limited control of it, then it's hard to tell other people what's going to happen, even though everybody wants, like, the whole world wants like a clear plan that will just work, right? Like they want predictability, but I just said things that are not predictable so much. And I think that's like, at the same time, I think team members, they're human. We're all humans. We have lives,
Right.
and are impatient for a variety of reasons. Sometimes, sometimes bad reasons, which is like, FOMO and friends and, wanting, like, I want to do this before I get married or whatever, like all that kind of stuff. And that's hard. And that's probably the bad human traits that we all click into. But there's like reasonable human traits. Like you want to do things, you want to do, like, and so I'm deeply empathetic to the two sides. And like, how do you, like, as a leader, kind of, bring confidence, but also like there's a reality, right, on that stuff, and also respect to employees, to their lives and what they want to do too, right? So like those,
Right.
it's a tough intersection. And I don't think there's a magic formula. I wish there
Intersection.
was.
All of
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Sorry, one last question. One
Oh, yeah.
last question.
Yeah,
Please.
yeah.
This is a fascinating conversation. So, we what is the one thing that you think of as a potential blocker to the next ARR milestone that we are actively trying to de-risk, and how do you approach it?
Like what's the metal that we're in right now? I actually, it's funny. The VCs all talk about there's like these stages of companies, and there's like 1 to 10, and then to like da da da. And on one hand, like, and I used to think as an operator, like, oh, that's kind of BS. This is kind of dumb. Like they're picking arbitrary. Like the numbers are kind of arbitrary, but there are phases. Like I now can look back in retrospect. There are phases of companies. There's like the, invention first sale phase, and there's like the first kind of like capturing the momentum phase. There's all these phases that actually happen. And yeah, they're roughly correlated to sometimes these revenue numbers and all of these things. Like I actually think for us, it's, we were lucky enough now to actually get out of some of those early phases, but now we actually have to, in my view, the maturation here is around learning to, this may sound so dumb, but like learning the levers of actually how to forecast and control the business, right? And so like, I think the team has, like, I say this, like, what's the dumb line I say? Something around like measure, forecast, and drive. And what I mean by that is like, there's these phases that you go through. So like early on, when you're like in this kind of like, the market's happening, you just shit happens. And gee, you literally can't even measure. You measure in the velocity of the quarter. You're like, oh, how much we saw? Oh, wow, surprise, right? Like, and so like there's like, that's like, those are the earlier stages of stuff, right? But at some point you figure out, you're like, hey, we can literally measure what happened here, whether it be like what sold from what segment, or which SKU actually happened, or what expansion actually happened. These are all different things that actually happen in this space. Like, what was the entry point for that kind of motion? Like, you can actually measure. You're like, great, that happened, and you can show up after the quarter and be like, this happened, right? In this way,
not anymore anecdotal, right? There is a pattern that starts emerging.
Yes, right. And so like, but in any of these motions, you're actually like, you catch it in and you measure it at the end of the quarter. You're like, great, I'm glad we did that, right? Whatever the thing is, right? Whether it's expansion, whether it's this segment, whether it's this new SKU, whatever it is, okay? Then, a little more maturation comes along, and you actually, for each of those things, you get better at forecasting. You know it's gonna like happen with some, predictive ability, right? 30 days out, a quarter out, 6 months out, you get better at understanding it. And so some of that for each of those things might come down to better understanding the TAM, or really understanding the levers of like, oh, there's this much seat expansion possible, and how much can we actually like forecast it in, and what's our hit rate of actually expanding on this kind of segment with this kind of health score, and you get better at actually seeing, or you're like, hey, this is what the demand pipeline looks like for this kind of SKU, and this is what we're seeing, and this is what the marketing funnel has shown repeatability in this way for this kind of SKU and this kind of buyer. So you get much better at predicting these things because you can understand these levers, right? And once you understand each of those levers, then the last phase is you actually can start pulling them and saying like, okay, like let's start cranking this MF, right? Like you get to actually like, you do that, like you can actually push that forecast harder because you really deeply understand those levers. And so I would say for us, like right now we're decomposing, like decomposing these axes, these levers right now. And I actually think this is going to happen always. You're going to introduce new SKUs, you're going to introduce new markets, you're going to attack new geographies, and you have to go through this phasing for each of those. But I think we're now understanding that there's X levers for the business right now. And so we have to get like good at this forecast and drive part of it. And I think if you can do that, then you've actually got multiple levers you can pull, when you're pulling them. And back to your capital question, and this is me learning, then when you have the levers, these are capital deployment things you can actually do, right? That actually
scale it.
Yeah. And so I think those are the things that I think every business hits these at different points. They hit them multiple times, right? For us, that's the growing up we're in right now. And that can happen. You need to get to the point where you have enough progress, where you have the foundations that you can actually do this, right? And that's for me around really understanding the business. And that's, I believe, the phase that unlocks further for us is when we really understand how to pull those levers down.
Thank you. And Andrew, thank you so much for graciously spending so much time to share your learnings for the community. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for listening. I mean, I'm just droning on here. I think this is super interesting stuff for me. Hopefully it is for other folks here listening.